Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The Palestinians are observing a Black Day today to protest the signing ceremony of the UAE and Bahrain's peace deals with Israel. Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh has called it a darkest chapter in the history of the Arab world and a surrender of the Arab League. Shtayyeh urged the other Arab states not to take part in the celebrations. The United Kingdom's House of Commons has passed a law giving Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government the power to override parts of the Brexit deal. The lawmakers backed the internal market bill by 340 votes to 263. Ministers say the bill protects Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK if negotiations on a future trade deal break down. Nine people have been killed in a car bomb blast in Syria's northern Aleppo province. Turkish state media says 43 others were wounded in the attack in the Afrin city. The area is under Turkish forces' control since 2018's anti-PKK operation. The number of COVID-19 cases in India has surpassed 4.9 million after a spike of nearly 84,000 new infections in the last 24 hours. More than 1,000 people died overnight in India, raising the death toll to over 80,000. In Pakistan, 6 more people have lost their lives to the virus, taking the death count to 6,389. Globally, the virus has infected more than 29 million people and claimed over 927,000 lives so far. China has decided to extend existing tariff exemptions for 16 products from the US by an additional year. Country's finance ministry said the products include lubricants, whey and fish meal. The decision was taken despite Washington's step of blocking some exports from China's Xinjiang region yesterday. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The Palestinians are observing a Black Day today to protest the signing ceremony of the UAE and Bahrain's peace deals with Israel. Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh has called it the darkest chapter in the history of the Arab world and surrender of the Arab League. Shtayyeh said the accord will be another day to add to the calendar of Palestine's misery. He urged the other Arab states not to take part in the celebrations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the top diplomats from the UAE and Bahrain are set to sign the deal today in Washington, D.C. Now, Pakistan has welcomed the announcement of the global initiative on data security by China last week. In a statement, the Foreign Office said reliable information and communications technology regime is essential to ensuring socio-economic progress. It said there is a need for dialogue and international cooperation to achieve an inclusive environment in cyberspace. The Foreign Office said Pakistan is committed to promoting international cooperation in cybersecurity. It said all countries are equal stakeholders in the development of rules governing digital economy and security of cyberspace. The UK's House of Commons has passed a law giving Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government the power to override parts of the Brexit deal. The lawmakers backed the internal market bill by 340 votes to 263. Ministers say the bill protects Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK if negotiations on a future trade deal break down. The legislation has garnered widespread criticism, and the opposition has blamed Johnson of having no regard for international law. However, the British Prime Minister said he ensures the UK could not be broken up by a foreign power. He accused the European Union of acting in an extreme way.
I regret to have to tell the House that in recent months the EU has suggested that it is willing to go to extreme and unreasonable lengths, using the Northern Ireland Protocol in a way that goes well beyond common sense, simply to exert leverage against the UK in our negotiations for a free trade agreement.
Well, Boris Johnson said the United Kingdom must reserve the right to override the Brexit deal to protect the country's economic and political integrity. Now, moving on, 9 people have been killed in a car bomb blast in Syria's northern Aleppo province. Turkish state media says 43 others were wounded in the attack in the Afrin city. The area is under Turkish control since 2018's anti-PKK operation. An explosives-laden small truck detonated, causing huge damage to the property in the vicinity. Turkish media accused the PKK militants of carrying out the attack. However, the group has not claimed responsibility so far. Moving on, the International Atomic Energy Agency has reached an agreement with Tehran over the implementation of safeguards in Iran's nuclear plant. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi says the agreement will help develop cooperation and build mutual confidence between the UN body and Tehran. Director General Rafael Grossi said IAEA had access to one of the 2 sites that was demanded by the international inspectors. But Grossi said he has discussed access to the second site in his recent meeting with Iran's President Hassan Rouhani. He said IAEA inspectors will visit Tehran's second nuclear site later this month. Iran and the IAEA released a joint statement last month to emphasize the facilitation of implementing the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. Now, the number of COVID-19 cases in India has surpassed 4.9 million after a spike of nearly 84,000 new infections in the last 24 hours. The Indian Health Ministry said more than 1,000 people died overnight, raising the death toll to over 80,000. Globally, the virus has infected more than 29 million people and claimed over 927,000 lives so far. Meanwhile, the UN chief says only a unified effort can help defeat the pandemic. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
I do believe that multilateralism will prevail and that nationalism, populism that is spreading will in the end fail. And by the way, if you look at COVID, it is clear that populist and nationalistic approaches have basically failed where they were attempted.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 6 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the country's death toll has reached 6,389. The ministry said 404 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said there are 5,774 active infections, while the total confirmed cases have crossed 302,000 mark. The ministry said over 290,000 people have recovered so far. Meanwhile, a phase-wise opening of education institutions has begun in Pakistan today. The National Command and Operations Center says a special monitoring mechanism has been devised to ensure implementation of protocols. Now, China has decided to extend existing tariff exemptions for 16 products from the United States by an additional year. The Chinese Finance Ministry said the products include lubricants, whey and fish meal. Washington announced a broad import ban including cotton and tomato products from the region, but it later left these products out and implemented narrower bans on products from 5 specific entities. Ties between the 2 countries have worsened this year over a range of issues, including the coronavirus, South China Sea, Hong Kong, telecom and global trade. China says it firmly opposes what it called the U.S. coercive trade practices exercised on non-American enterprises. This comes after ByteDance rejected to sell TikTok's U.S. operations to Microsoft. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said certain U.S. politicians have been abusing power under the pretext of national security. Wang said their actions of suppressing and coercing non-American companies expose their agenda of robbery and economic bullying. He urged Washington to provide a non-discriminatory business environment for foreign companies operating in the country.
China firmly opposes that and will firmly support the pertinent companies in safeguarding their legitimate rights and interests and uphold international economic and trade rules. We urge the U.S. government to provide an open, fair, just and non-discriminatory business environment for companies operating in the country.
Meanwhile, the U.S. tech firm Oracle has confirmed the partnership with ByteDance. Now moving on to Peru, whose government has filed a lawsuit to block impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra. Justice Ministry lawyer Luis Huerta says the government wants the Constitutional Court to temporarily suspend the process. Huerta said the move is more of a precaution until the Constitutional Court rules on the matter. Meanwhile, in a televised message, Vizcarra renewed his vow to not resign.
I must tell Peruvians that what is happening here is the betrayal of someone close to me. It causes me sadness and beyond from the deception. I regret to say that this is a situation of a personal nature that has crossed over to the political sphere and has been leveraged by dark characters.
Well, last week, Peru's Congress began impeachment proceedings against Vizcarra for the second time in his tenure. Now, the Human Rights Watch has called for an end to interference in aid operations by parties to Yemen's conflict. In its latest report, the rights body said this obstruction is putting millions of people at risk who are dependent on assistance. The report said about 24 million of Yemen's 30 million people are in need of some form of assistance. It said since May, the Houthis have blocked 262 containers in Hudaydah port belonging to the World Health Organization. The body said blockage of a large shipment of personal protective equipment is hampering the efforts for the COVID-19 response. It accused the rebels of using shipments as bargaining chips. However, Houthi authorities told the Human Rights Watch allegations of aid interferences are baseless. Donor concerns about aid obstructions and interferences are part of the reason why funding is low. The report that donors in June pledged only $1.35 billion for humanitarian activities for the rest of 2020. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. A group of researchers has detected a potential sign of aerial life within Venus's atmosphere. The finding could be a major scientific breakthrough in search for extraterrestrial life. Venus' harsh surface is inhospitable to life with temperatures exceeding 880 degrees Fahrenheit. But the group of international scientists said 2 telescopes in Hawaii and Chile found signs of phosphine in the Venusian clouds. The toxic gas is found on Earth only if it is manufactured or if it is produced by living organisms. Venus's clouds were thought to be able to tolerate microbial life so long as it could exist in the highly acidic environments. Global warming resulting from abrupt climate change due to emissions continues to worry scientists. In yet another unnerving revelation, they say the vast and ancient ice sheet shifting atop Greenland shed a 113 square kilometers chunk of ice within last month. Details in this report.
Section of the Spalt Glacier at the northwest corner of the Arctic island had been cracking for several years. On the 27th of August, it finally broke free, clearing the way for inland ice loss to the sea. The Greenpeace ship has come to the very edge of the Arctic to document and protect that is hidden under the surface. Researchers say they want to make sure world leaders understand the urgency and the role of healthy oceans in tackling the climate crisis.
The new research is yet another important piece of evidence showing that it's really time we stop hitting the snooze button and wake up to the climate emergency. We need to curb climate emissions right now, immediately, and we need to create a network of ocean sanctuaries covering at least a third of the blue planet if we are to take climate crisis seriously.
The Arctic has warmed more than twice as fast as the rest of the world over the last 4 decades. Scientists say all 3 variables, sea ice, temperatures and rainfall, are now being measured well beyond the range of past observations. That makes the future of the Arctic more of a mystery. From the deck of the ship, pilot Paul Ruziski muses over how quickly the region is changing since he began navigating between icebergs in 1996.
Well, not so long ago, I heard that we had 100 years before all the glaciers would be melting and the Arctic would be ice-free in the summer. Then I heard 75 years, 50 years, and recently I heard 15 years, 1-5. So it's accelerating. I'm not a scientist, but I listen to what the scientists say.
Sea ice coverage are now about 31%, lower than in the decade after 1979 when satellite observations began. This vanishing of sea ice also contributes to the region's warming. The icy white expanse is replaced by patches of dark water that absorbs solar radiation rather than reflecting it back out of the atmosphere.
Well, now, a floating cinema has launched a brand new experience for moviegoers in London, aiming to help bring the city's film industry back to life. More about this unique cinema in this report.
After a decline in coronavirus cases, cinemas across the UK were allowed to reopen in July. Social distancing rules and face masks. The pandemic sure has brought in some new trends. On Regent's Canal in central London, over 100 moviegoers can float in, moor up and watch stars on the UK's biggest ever riverside screen, listening through noise-cancelling headphones.
Just a comfortable way, I think, that we all feel safe as well, and we feel like we can still spend time together and make memories in such a unique way.
It's just a new way to be safe, but also it's a new way to watch the movie.
In line with government guidance, groups of up to 6 people from different households can take to the water. Open-air cinema is charging just over £16 for a deck chair and £34 per person for a boat for 8 people.
Our revenue drops from March. Our revenue as a production company dropped by about 95%. So our industry has been hit really hard. So it's all about everyone now pivoting and coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things.
There are worries, though, that as winter approaches, outdoor events like this will not only be hit by worsening weather, but by a second wave of the virus.
Now, China has become the only country in G20 to record gross domestic product growth in the second quarter of 2020. A report by Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says China has returned an 11.5% growth in the quarter. The report said Beijing forecast a 3.2% year-on-year rise in its GDP. It said an average drop of 11.8% was recorded in all other G20 economies compared with the first quarter except for China. India's GDP nosedived by 25.2%, while the US saw a 9.1% drop, with 8 countries posting double-digit drops. Most of the Asian equities have advanced, with investor sentiment supported by Chinese data and optimism about COVID-19 vaccines. MSCI broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan rose 0.5% for a 4th straight day. The S&P 500 put on 0.2%, reversing early losses, while Euro Stoxx 50 futures eased 0.2%. Japan's Nikkei shed 0.5%, while South Korean shares were 0.5% higher. Australia's S&P and ASX 200 index eased 0.2%. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.